are starting a new sermon series this morning. I am super excited about it. I believe that God has been stirring this in my heart for months. As God has been preparing me, been speaking to me, I can honestly say that this past week I have had hours of conversation with different people on staff and just speaking about what God has just really been challenging me with. And I believe that this is fixing to be a sermon series that I do believe is going to challenge us at a maximum level. And we believe that because we know that as we follow Christ, this is something that we've been talking about for a while, right? And I'm holding on to this statement a lot, that when you are following Jesus, nothing is off the table. When you're a follower of Christ, there is nothing that we get to pull away from him and say, this is mine and you can't have it. It's all on the table. No part of it. This gets tough as it begins to get real personal. Am I right? When all of a sudden it gets real personal, we're talking beyond like, hey, I just need you to give up caffeinated drinks. Hey, I need you to go a little bit slower on Starbucks. We're talking about when he really starts getting into the nitty-gritty of our hearts and asks us to do things and to become things and to let go of things that we have held on to sometimes all of our lives and our existence up to this point. But that's what this is all about. When you follow him, he shows you what that is. I'm reminded of that passage where Jesus is talking to Peter. He was calling him, and he said, follow me, and I will make you become. Follow me, and I will make you become. Can you imagine what's going through Peter's mind, right? Like as Jesus is saying, hey, follow me, and I'm going to make you become a radical follower of me who is going to be a fisherman of men. You see, here's what I need us to understand, not so much the whole fisher of men piece, but God is always calling us into something that is outside of anything that is of our natural order. He is always calling us to something that is outside of who we are in the natural. He's moving us. He never lets us become content with just where we are at. We are being moved into the image of Christ, moved into a person who is a follower of him, and he defines that for us. Him as the way, the truth, and the life. He's like, listen, I want you to experience that, so let me show you what that's going to look like. This is exactly why I believe he's calling us to this series, Radical Love. Because I think it is super easy for us to have an idea of love that we believe is pretty solid, that Jesus comes in and goes, but I need to tweak some things. I need to make some things look a little bit different. What you think and what I know, what you think and what Jesus thinks, oftentimes are two totally different things. So why? Why are we talking about radical love? Why is this so important for us today? I think there's two reasons. Number one, people are getting harder to love. And if I could really probably go back and maybe adjust that point and make this adjustment on your notes, really I think it's safe to say that people are getting harder to want to love. So it's not just that they're hard to love, it's getting hard to want to love them. With everything that's going on in our world today, it's just hard to want to do that. Political lines are becoming dividing lines. LGBTQ+, BLM, gun control, vaccines, gender identity, abortion. Man, those are all subjects that foster something inside of us. Listen, it fosters whether you're on the left side, or you're on the right side, you're in the middle. You think something. It makes you feel something. Every one of us are faced with dealing how we feel. Not about the subject. It's not so much the subject matter. So often it's the people who represent these things. You're a Republican. You're a Democrat. You're gay. You're for gun control. We just can't be friends. We can't hang out. I struggle loving you. And so often that's how we see it in the world today. So many labels that we throw around that determines whether or not we're going to love somebody. Agendas. Well, this is what I believe, so we can't fill in the blank. But we have to talk about what Jesus has called us to in this life, that we live with him. Because here's the deal, the world is not going to get easier, and people are not going to get easier to want to love. They're not. It's going to be more and more difficult. Which leads me to my next statement, which is this right here. Why radical love? I think it's the most simple one. It's because that's what we're commanded to do. That's exactly what we're called to do to people. We're to love others. We're commanded to do that. Here, listen, I'm just going to list off verses. I guarantee you, if you've been in church at some level, you've heard these. They're not new. I'm not digging into some places that I've never looked at before. These are right they're right in the New Testament, the place that we love to read. Matthew 22, 34 through 40. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depends all the law and the prophets. 1 John 4:7, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Woo, that starts getting heated. If you love the way we're supposed to, you're born to love by him. He has made you to do that. 1 John 4:7 and 8. So go back to that one a little bit. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Gets even stickier. So now when we struggle with this whole love thing, and we'll get more into that in just a second, there may be some things that we can't really say about ourselves, like we belong to him. 1 John 4:11 and 12. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought to love one another. We also ought to love one another. No one has seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. 1 John 4:21, and this commandment we have from him. Whoever loves God must also love his brother, sister, people. 1 Peter 4:8, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. 1 Corinthians 16:14, let all that you do be done in love. Listen, if we don't love, we can't say that we belong to God. If we don't love and moving towards love the way he loves, man, I find it difficult for us to be able to look at ourselves and say, I am of God. Now, the hardship of that is I think oftentimes we can say that we're Christians, but are we of God? And every one of us, I guarantee you've said one of these. You've said one of these. I mean, I don't hate Democrats. I don't hate Republicans. I don't hate people who are pro-choice, and I don't hate people who have same-sex attraction. I don't hate them. I just, I just don't know that I can be in the same room with them. Am I right? It's easy for us to say that. I don't hate them. Just because you don't hate someone doesn't mean that you're doing what God has called you to do as a follower of him. just because you don't hate them. Listen, tolerating someone is not loving someone. If I tolerate you, that's our excuse for saying, well, I don't hate them. But I don't know that we can say that tolerating someone is exactly what God has called us to do. So what is this all leading us to? I want us to look at some very important words that are going to help us kind of jumpstart this whole series on radical love so that we can begin to see what God is calling us to do. And man, this is such a beautiful place because he's in the upper room with the disciples and he's kind of having one of those last conversations with them before he is arrested, tried, and crucified. And so these words are pretty critical words. We hold on to these words. And so you have Jesus coming into his disciples and he says this in John 13, "Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Now, is anybody else confused by this? Because he's calling this a new commandment. He says, a new command I give to you. Like, weren't we reading some of this stuff in like Leviticus? That we're to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Like in Deuteronomy, we see this evidence where he says, listen, you're going to love God. And as a result of that, you're going to love people. So what makes it a new commandment to his disciples? To people who call themselves follower of him, what makes this a new thing? The answer is this, that it raises to an entirely new level and it gives an entirely new significance to the love that he's talking about. He raises the bar in what it means for us to love other people. This is what makes it new. We can say that it's given it a new object. You realize in like early times, like if people were justified religiously to hate someone, they could. Jews hated Samaritans. Jews hated Gentiles. They didn't want to take any of the love of God to them. They were just kind of the rejects. And so that's what we're dealing with. And now Jesus comes along and he says, listen, no, you're not just going to tolerate people. You're actually going to love everyone. So that's the object of our love is people. Not pick and choose. It's people. Despite what they think, despite what they believe, it's people. That's who he's calling us to love. It is to be exercised according to a new measure. Like there's a new ruler in town. There's a new person who says, listen, man, let me give you like success. Let me define success for you, because the success that they were living off of oftentimes were religious people who were expressing a wrong love. That's why in the Sermon on the Mount, what did he tell the people? He said, listen, unless your righteousness exceeds the Pharisees, they were the religious people, by the way. They were the ones that were setting the bar. They were the ones that you measured your success by them. And Jesus comes in and goes, unless your righteousness is greater than them, man, you can't come into the kingdom. You can't experience the kingdom. So he's coming in now and saying, listen, your measurement is me. How I loved, that's how you're going to love. And we know this right here. It's made possible by a new power. Now he's coming along and saying, you can't even do this without me. Without the power of the Holy Spirit within us, we can't operate and walk the way that he has called us to walk. And so he's coming in and saying, it's raised up. You're going to be dependent upon me if you're actually going to do this. In essence, what he's doing is he's saying, listen, I'm calling you to something that's radical. I'm calling you to something that is outside the realm of your norm. That's the definition of radical, by the way. It refers to a departure from the norm or the ordinary. What's normal or what's ordinary. So take that same definition and add the idea of love to it. Radical love is a love that goes beyond human understanding and societal norms. That's radical love. It goes beyond what we think It goes beyond what we feel. It goes beyond sometimes what we've grown to believe. It's a love that mirrors the sacrificial love of Jesus, who laid down his life for humanity. That's the love that we're talking about here. 1 John 4, 8 through 10. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love. Not that we've loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation of our sins. Radical in that it was sacrificial. It involves selflessness, compassion, and a willingness to love others unconditionally, even when it's difficult or costly. That's this love that he is calling us to. And in Philippians 2, 3 through 5, he says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among you, which is yours in Christ Jesus. In other words, we're looking out now and going, man, like I want to love you like unconditionally, but man, it's going to cost me something. But that's okay, because I'm loving outside of me. And I'm doing what Christ has called me to do. So here's kind of the big understanding. What makes love radical is that it is done the way Jesus loved. Radical is not a pat on your back because you did it. Radical love is that we love the way that Jesus loved. We watched him. Jesus' love becomes the model and the standard of our success. How did he do it? How do I do that? I watched him do this. Man, that means that I'm going to walk in and do that. So as followers of Christ, we have to ask, listen to some of these questions. 1, would Jesus love someone who thought differently than him? Would Jesus love and be connected to 2 men in love with one another holding hands on the streets? Would Jesus love a pro-choice activist? Would Jesus love people who were about gun control? Would Jesus love, fill in the blank with maybe somebody you struggle loving? And maybe the question that we have to ask is like, would Jesus love those that I can hardly tolerate? Would Jesus love them? And here's the big question. Would Jesus question how I think and feel about people that he loves? Would he question my love for them when he says, I love them. These are my people. Would he question those that we look at and go, I don't know that I should love you? I think there's some of us, if we got real nitty gritty, would even question whether or not God really loved them because of whatever it is. But would he question me? So what is this all about? What does this mean for us? If we want to be this person who loves radically, what is it all about? Because here's the truth of the matter. This is what we're called to do. This is what this is about. We are called to be radical lovers of God who radically love one another. So how do we do that? If you struggle with it, listen to me when I say this. If you struggle with it, I get it. It makes sense that you would struggle with some of these. It makes sense that you would struggle loving people because it is a supernatural thing. So what does it really mean for us if we're going to take this step and actually love the way that Christ called us to love? Now, here's the deal. This is where it gets simple, but extremely difficult. This is where it gets really just grassroots level. But there's nothing easy. Loving radically is nothing more than following Jesus and doing what he did. Loving radically simply means following Christ and doing what he did. But here's where it gets sticky. The church today has complicated this. Follow Christ, do what he said. Follow God, obey him. Listen, obey. Somehow we have developed some form of Christianity that says I don't really have to follow him and do what he says. And nobody would ever say that, but it's how we tend to live our lives. We don't have an awareness that living for Christ means following him and do what he says. But what we have dumbed it down to is this. Man, I prayed a prayer. I go to church. I read my Bible. I pray. I sometimes go to life group. I might go to church like once or twice a month. I'm a Christian. And that becomes our title. I am a Christian. You know what that word Christian meant early on? It was actually a slap in the face. It meant little Christ or mini Messiah. Like, so you had these religious people going, oh, look, we got a mini Messiah over here. We got a little Jesus on our hands. And then our early fathers began to adopt that and said, but that's what it is. I am just a little Christ. I am a miniature Jesus. The problem is that today the word Christian doesn't mean a whole lot. I'm a Christian doesn't really measure up oftentimes to the rest of what the world thinks. It describes someone who's mentally ascribed to the bare bones of Christianity and may or may not do things that other churchy people do. It's oftentimes what people see. And so we have adopted, listen to this, we've adopted this mindset that being radical is the next level to the entry level of faith. We have to use words like radical. I'm a radical follower because just being a follower wasn't enough. I love radically because, well, man, I didn't really do that, but now I'm really in, and I'm radical about it. You see, if the early people listened to what we say today, they would be like, that doesn't make sense to me. When you follow Christ, you just follow Christ. And you are going to do things that are outside of you, and you're not going to understand them, but I need you to understand that it is about following him. Here was the command that they got. It was not from Jesus. Hey, would you like to be a Christian? Not one time do we see Jesus say that. Hey, Peter, you want to be a Christian? Hey, Peter, you want to go to church? You want to start reading the Torah? No, he simply said this. Hey, Peter, let's go. Just follow me. Matthew 9:9, and Jesus passed on from there, and he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. Matthew, tax collector, didn't like him. And he said to him, follow me. And he rose and he followed him. John 1:43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, follow me. And guess what he did? He followed him. And I love this, and I just wanted to throw this one in there because I think this is important for us to hear. John 10:27. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they, what does it say? My sheep, the people who belong to me. How are they defined? Kind of scary things. They hear him and they follow him. We hear and we obey. That's the true mark of someone who walks with Jesus. What are you asking me to do, Jesus? You want me to follow you wherever you go? I'm in. But somehow we've created this mindset that we don't really have to follow him, that we can just call ourselves a Christian. And somehow that is enough. You ever wonder why he said, follow me? Because Jesus knew that the only way for his followers to do what he did would happen as they were actually on the journey with him. Because he journeyed them into some pretty crazy places. Right after he calls Matthew. Next thing you know, Jesus is at a party with tax collectors. Disciples with him. Religious people standing on the outside asking questions. So they are watching Jesus go into these places, and there's questions like, why? Why are you going there? Like, we don't like these people. Why? Like, you can't associate with that. And Jesus says, no, listen, I've come to love people. I've come to love broken people. I've come to be, like, I'm called to the sick. Like, that's where I go. The only way to do what we're supposed to do is to know what Jesus did, and that happens when we are on the journey with him. You know what that means? It means that we have to stay close. You ever tried to follow somebody on the roads when there's a lot of traffic and all of a sudden they get way far ahead of you? My father-in-law, like, he is quick to say, listen, I'm going to lead out, because that's just what he does, and he's just like, stay close. Because, bro, he is pedal to the metal and he's getting where we're getting. And if I look down for a second, I find myself like miles behind him, like wondering where in the world he is. And that's so often what we do with Jesus. We kind of have this mindset of like, hey, I'm going to follow you, but then we kind of start hanging back. And the next thing we know, we don't know what he's doing and we don't know where he's gone. So we can't do what he's called us to do because we're not close. That's why he said in John 15, abide in me. As a branch apart from the vine can do nothing, neither can you if you are not connected to him. Which means there is not a chance in the world that we can do anything as a follower of him if we're not close to him. So that becomes what we do. God, I just want to stay close to you. And God, I'm going to do what it takes to do that. I just want to see you in what you're doing. Stay close. Stay close. Listen, let's jump back into a verse that I kind of said something about earlier. It says this in Matthew 4:19, and he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and they followed him. Man, when I read these words, it was like this verse jumped off of the page in a way that I don't know that I've ever seen it before. Like, I'm calling Vince up going, bro, I'm just going to read this to you because it ignited in me something. Remember, we're talking about closeness. I think we easily read this verse because we love this verse. Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men. We use that as a way to say, hey, listen, he's going to grow us into people that are going to talk about him. And we can get focused on that. We can get focused on the action, follow me. Like, we hear those words and we're like, yes, follow him. I'm one of the crew. I'm on the inside. Following him. Or maybe we look at the calling, fishers of men. Yeah, we need to be like fishing for men. Let's go. Come on, let's do it. Or we get to the reaction. Immediately they followed. And we're just going, how do they do that? How do they drop their nets and just follow Jesus? That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't, does it? They dropped everything, by the way. Everything that they had lived for, gone now. Following him. But I got stuck on the process. He said, follow me, and I will make you become. Follow me, and I'm going to show you what it looks like to become a fisherman of men. Flip that over to what we're talking about. Follow me, and I will make you a radical lover of people. I will make you. I thought about this in the process of following, in the process of abiding, in the process of staying close. Almost like we don't want to leave his shadow. Wherever his shadow is, that's where I'm going to be. And at noon, when that sun's blazing straight down during the hottest part of the day, your shadow is right underneath you, and that's where I'm going to be, because sometimes we live in a place where the sun is just shining straight down, and it's hard to live, right? When the heat's on, that's when we have to get the closest. Because he knew that in the process, he is making us into his known creation. What does that even mean? Remember in Psalm 139, what does he say? Before I formed you, I knew you. He knew what we would become. And that's what he's asking us to do, is to live out the known thing about us, where he says, listen, I have called you to follow me, and you're following me, so now what you're going to do is you're going to radically love other people. You're going to love people as I loved other people. In the process, he's making us into his known creation. In the process, he's making us into who we are called to be. Look at Isaiah 64:8. Man, this old, this visual of what God is doing. But now, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you are our potter. We are the work of your hands. Which means if we're not in his hands, we can't be made into what he wants us to be. If you're not close to him, you're not going to walk the way he called you to walk. Maybe you're wondering, with all of the struggles that you have in your life, not even loving people, just whatever it may be, right? Sexual addiction, gossip, slander. Maybe the reason why we're stuck in those is because we're not close to him, so that we have no idea what it means to walk free from that. Because it's in the process with him, when we're abiding with him, that he makes us into. He makes us into people who represent him in everything they do. But hear me, and what I'm about to share with you. This is the very thing that I believe that the Lord has been showing me clearly this past week. What makes all of this worth it? You see, when we follow him, we get him. Is that a letdown? When we follow him, that's exactly what we get. We get Jesus. Isn't that what makes all of this worth it? I need you to understand something about this series. This series is not going to be our opportunity to take a stance on some really spicy hot topics. This is not a series on giving you step 1, 2, 3, 4 on how you're going to radically love people and it's going to transform you. No, this is going to be a series on what it means for us to actually be followers of Christ, that as a result of that, we live life the way he's called us to. That's what this radical love series is about. Now, our hope is at the end, when we walk through every bit of this, that we grasp this reality, that our love looks different. But all of this is going to start because we're willing to take up our cross and follow him. Actually, he says to deny yourself. Get out of the way. Take up your cross. It's going to cost you something. and follow me so that I can make you become. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. So radical love. It's out there. But when you're near to Jesus, that's when we're going to be able to do it. I want you to bow your heads with me. I want to start off by simply asking this question. Okay? I need you to listen to me when I ask this. This is the real deal. This morning, where are you? Where do you stand? Are you a Christian? With all of the good stuff that goes with it? Or are you a follower? Where are you? Have you done all the religious stuff? You call yourself a Christian. But are you void of actually being close to Jesus? Because you don't follow him. This is about Jesus, by the way. It's about loving him and seeking him with everything that we have. Which ultimately means that we will die to how we view other people and how we don't love other people. We will die to that, and we will take up our cross, meaning that we will walk loving people no matter what it costs us. And in the end, we just get to follow him. That's enough, right? That we get him. We get Jesus. He is the King of our lives, and we get to rest in him. Is that enough? Church, it's time as a church that we start asking those hard questions. Are we Christians or are we followers? I think that's why he tells us what he tells us in Matthew 7, that many people are going to come to me and say, God, I knew I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you. Because they did every bit of that apart from following him. So if that makes your guts feel funny this morning, that makes your head start spinning a little bit where you start going, I don't like that question, Dustin. I don't like what it's making me think right now. That's okay. But are you willing to move on it? Are you willing to really deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him? Not just verbally, but physically. Anybody want to surrender to that call? Anybody here this morning just going, man, I've missed it. I'm a great Christian on paper. I can check all the boxes. But I don't know the last time I actually followed Christ. well, it might be time to repent. If you really want to do this. It might just be time that we get on our face before God and say, God, I've been a really good Christian, but I can't say that I'm a follower.